One of the questions that I've been asked multiple times throughout the offseason surrounds Alabama's outside linebackers, especially with the emergence of Chris Braswell as a strong third option. And what people typically want to know is, how does Alabama plan to get all three players on the field, or how do they plan to distribute the snaps between the three players? Now, I think this is an interesting question because I think a lot of it is going to be dictated based off how much the defensive line ends up being used as well. In most situations, Alabama's going to have a four-man front, but how they align that four-man front, I think, is something to note. They'll either be using 3-3-5 personnel, meaning 3 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs, or a 2-4-5 defense, which is going to be 2 defensive linemen, 4 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs. But 2 of those linebackers, keep in mind, are going to be in a defensive end position, typically with their hand in the dirt or in a 2-point stance. But they're going to be on the line of scrimmage. When they've got that 3-3-5 personnel on the field, only one of those 3 linebackers is going to be lined up on the edge as a quote-unquote defensive lineman. I say all that to say this. There are going to be instances where a guy like Dallas Turner is already on the sidelines because Alabama's in that 3-3-5 look, meaning they've got 3 true defensive linemen, only 1 edge player, and 2 off-ball linebackers. So he's already going to be ceding snaps in those situations. Do you want to also see him cede more of his snap share to a guy like Chris Braswell, knowing that Dallas Turner is probably a little bit better of a player? I'm sure there will be some instances of that, but I'm not entirely sure that that's going to happen too often. And the reason that I say Turner is the one ceding his snaps is that you're probably not going to have Will Anderson off the field in too many situations. I mean, this is a guy that played close to 90% of the snaps, 87.2% of the snaps to be exact, last year. He's already proven that he can handle a heavy workload, and considering he's the best player in college football, not just the best defensive player, but the best player, you're not going to want to have that guy on the sidelines too much. So when they go with the 3-3-5 personnel, more than likely that one edge or one outside linebacker is going to be Will Anderson, which means Dallas Turner is going to be the one heading to the bench. Now, prior to Drew Sanders getting hurt last year, Dallas Turner was only playing roughly about 16.8% of the defensive snaps. Once Sanders got hurt, that number jumped all the way up to 46.2% once Turner became the quote-unquote starter. And even after taking over that job, he still played less than 50% of the snaps. Now, some of that probably has to do with the fact that he was a true freshman, but it's at least something to keep in mind. Now, Drew Sanders, on the other hand, when he became the starter against Miami once Christopher Allen went down with an injury, he played 76.9% of the defensive snaps in his 5 games as the quote-unquote starter. Do I think Dallas Turner reaches that percentile? With Chris Braswell on the roster, probably not. But I do think that he can get in that 60 to 65% range and maybe even get up there close to 70%. But even if Chris Braswell doesn't see his snap share significantly increase, which I do think it's going to increase some, but even if it doesn't increase a substantial amount, I still think the timing in which he is used in football games is going to make his impact on Alabama's win-loss record or impact on defense a lot more substantial. This guy's going to be out there on crucial snaps and crucial situations. And I certainly think that with his efficiency as a pass rusher, he's going to be an effective player who gets noticed. You know, one thing Nick Saban said about Chris Braswell during his press conference yesterday had to do with Braswell coming out of high school and the fact that when he was in high school, he was typically putting his hand in the dirt, being exclusively a defensive end. So when he gets to Alabama as a 6'3", 240-pound outside linebacker, getting moved to outside linebacker, he's still going to be a pass rusher, but he was never going to be considered a full-time defensive end in the eyes of not only college coaches, but NFL evaluators as well. So he had to learn to play as a 3-4 outside linebacker. That means not only getting after the quarterback, but also being able to drop in coverage. And that took Braswell a little bit of time. But now that he started to get more comfortable in that setting and being asked to do that, he has become a much better player and he can survive out there when he is getting snaps. But now fans will get to see just how good of a pass rusher this guy can actually be. We saw him wreak havoc back in the spring game. We saw him wreak havoc in the spring game prior, going into his sophomore year. It's like Nick Saban said, explosive off the snap, great first step quickness. And one of the other things that I wanted to bring up was what Nick Saban said about him being able to convert speed to power. That's such an overlooked quality when it comes to getting after opposing quarterbacks, is a guy who can convert speed to power. And if you don't know what that means, I'll explain. That's when the pass rusher uses speed and explosion off the snap to get the offensive tackle deep in his pass set and then automatically converts it to power by driving into the offensive lineman and bull rushing him into the quarterback. When you're able to do that effectively, It's such a lethal pass rush move because the offensive tackle is trying to compensate for your speed and explosiveness off the edge, and they're not really anticipating you turning that into a bull rush and being able to actually use power. So if you have that ability, it's very effective. And considering Braswell's only 6'3", 240 pounds, you wouldn't look at him and think of a power player. You would think of more of a finesse player. He's got the finesse side of it, but he also brings power as well, which makes me very excited to see how he's utilized this season. But look, this is not a job that I would want if I was the Alabama coaching staff. It's a good problem to have, but trying to figure out creative ways to get all three of these guys in the field is going to be really interesting. I do think there are going to be certain instances where you do get all three on the field, but it's probably going to have to be in obvious passing situations. And yes, that personnel package does exist that might have Chris Braswell and Will Anderson Jr. as the two defensive ends, with Dallas Turner as the Mike linebacker who is actually coming on blitzes. But I also think that if you wanted to, you could have Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell on the edges, and you could play Will Anderson as more of a 3 technique in specific, obvious passing situations. Imagining that trio alongside a potential interior pass rushing option in Jamil Burroughs is scary to think about for opposing offenses.
Great stuff from Clint Lamb, our team writer at Bama Insider. Hey fam, thank you very much for watching this video. Definitely hit the thumbs up, like, subscribe, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and check out one of our videos regarding the Alabama Crimson Tide. Reporting from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, this is the BamaInsider.com staff.